a warning to NATO, to the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. As Vladimir Putin is fighting a war of attrition in Ukraine, slowly but steadily sucking the capacity of NATO through Ukraine. Today is Bakhmut. Tomorrow is another city. The war can drag on for a long time. And during that time, NATO allies will be sending military help to Ukraine in the form of military equipment, thereby depleting the military ability of NATO to defend itself. At an appointed time, when Putin has seen that he has drained the resources of NATO, for there is a finite military resources that can be produced at any given time, even if all the production houses of the world are operational. And when NATO is drenched, Putin will release the bazooka. He will not focus on Ukraine anymore, but will move on to Poland. And you know, all hell will break loose in all of Europe, because NATO cannot understand that Putin's plan is to keep dragging this war for longer, just to drain NATO. Putin doesn't care about Ukraine. He knows that Ukraine on its own is a walkover. But Putin's tactic of not overpowering Ukraine, but matching Ukraine with whatever Ukraine gets from NATO, will keep this war of attraction for a longer time until NATO's abilities to wage war are weakened. And at the time when he has seen that the affairs are like that, he will get to attack possibly Poland or Finland or any other NATO nation that is weaker, and he will play the same playbook, pretend to be weaker, whilst we have got other arsenal at the back that we're keeping for the big war against the rest of Europe. In the meanwhile, whilst NATO is confronting Ukraine through the proxy, NATO is confronting Vladimir Putin through the proxy war in Ukraine. NATO need now to be focusing on the sources of the power of Putin. Well, Nord Stream 2 is no longer in line, and Europe is looking for optional sources of energy because of that. But Putin also has strong support. He's got access to resources in Africa through his private military arrangement with Wagner, which is terrorizing Africa, raping the rest of the Sahel, from the Sahel to the Middle Africa, all the way to South Africa, all the way to Cape Town itself. They were holding military drills here with the South African National Defense Forces, a planted raping, ravaging of the whole of African resources by Putin so that he can defeat NATO. So the NATO alliances, now listen very carefully, NATO alliances and the Quad, you need now to focus on the root of Putin's funding, which is Africa. Once we disempower the Wagner Group and Putin's hold on Africa, it will be very difficult for him to fund his war. And through that, the world will be safer. Thank you very much. Fighting Putin's war in Africa means finding alliances in Africa, developing relations with African countries that will counter this Russian threat in Africa. That means finding like-minded people in Africa who understand the importance of the rules-based order, the integrity, and the need to protect the human rights that we have in the world currently. Democracy, good governance, that all are the bedrock of the global prosperity that we all share today. Protect this global village, globalization that has enabled countries to go out of poverty through leaps and bounds, including China itself, which is today misbehaving, aligning itself with Russia. China needs to understand that it has to pick a box now. China needs to understand that it is at crossroads and has to dump Vladimir Putin and and all the plans that Putin is employing against the free world. China itself, which had its 1.4 billion people be rescued out of poverty through the terms and conditions of globalization and the safety the of the maritime waters anchored on the protection of the US hegemony, the US military. That very same China today, which has grown because of US strength, leveraging on US strength and US goodwill, is the same China that is boycotting or trying to boycott that global order and becoming a rogue state. At this crossroads, China has to recognize that it has to make strategic decisions of realigning itself with the global West, the global leaders. The global West has forgiven China for its lack of democracy in China, undermining certain human rights, including religious rights and populations that are in the minorities. So we do not envision or do not want to envision a world where CCP and and Putin are leading that world. It's going to be a nightmare. So Americans who are against war, who are against George Bush going into Iraq, and who are against Hillary Clinton in going to Tripoli, need to understand that war is essential at times, especially at times like this, when the global peace of the world, the global prosperity is threatened by forces like Putin, who want to undermine all the progress that we've made in the last 200 to 300 years. My appeal to the American public is that you have got to understand that it's either you say peace at the same time Putin is attacking you through pillaging the resources of Africa, or you understand why now it is time for the United States to act and not just be doing rhetoric, anti-Putin rhetoric, anti-Chinese rhetoric, but put boots on the ground in Africa and begin to call the shots and to police the world as the global police that it is supposed to be. For there is a need for a global leader. There is a need and space for a global police so that there is going to be order in the whole world. However, deglobalization and putting and going along with lines like put America first, which is promoted by Donald Trump, might sound on paper to be something that is pro-American, nationalistic, or better, but in actual fact, when the United States withdraws its presence as the global police, the whole world will begin to burn. Nefarious characters like Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin will arise in partnership with the weak African leaders who are willing to be corrupt and sell off the resources of their countries just to benefit the Chinese and the Russians, who in turn will take all that wealth to empower themselves and equip themselves to destroy the glory of Europe and the glory of the Western world. So you didn't now need to understand that It is essential that NATO and the forces of the world need now to rethink their strategy on Africa by aligning themselves with African leaders that are willing to maintain this global peace and to be very vigilant against Russian mercenaries pretending to be presidents of countries. And one of them is Emerson Tambos of Mnangagwa in Harare, who has to go in order to save the earth, in order to maintain global peace. All is God.